Oops, sorry. 1 minute. 1 minute. I gotta stop the recording.
Good afternoon, ladies, and we're ready. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies, and welcome to Torah with a Takeaway, Parshas Vayechi. Today we're going to speak about lessons from the eldest, lessons we can learn about Reuven, the good, the bad, the everything that we can glean about Reuven. Okay, and we're going to first start out, here was Yaakov is lying on his deathbed, and it says, Ish kabir chaso beirachosam. It says he gave each person like his blessing, he blessed them. So what kind of blessing is it? And what kind of blessings did he give them? According to each person's needs, he gave them a bracha. But we see by the first three tribes and a little bit of the fourth tribe, Yaakov did not hesitate and rebuke 3 or 4 of his sons. What kind of blessing is that when we're told that this is the blessings of Yaakov that he gave to all of his children? So Rav Chaim Matal Katz, one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Telz in Cleveland, when it was established in the 1940s, he said, when it says that Yaakov gave blessings to his children, this week's Parsha, it means that the biggest bracha you can give somebody is self-knowledge. Because Rav Nosson Bachvogel adds on, if a person does not have self-knowledge, people that have any problems with any of their character flaws, what happens is you're giving a blessing, says Rav Nosson, to a vessel with a lot of holes in it, and it won't hold the blessing. It won't hold the blessing. So the biggest bracha Yaakov could have given to his sons is let them have self-awareness. And then if they corrected, which they all did, by the way, that's why they're all on the Choshen Mishpat, they're on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And for posterity, they corrected what he told them. And by having that knowledge, they were able to reach greater heights. Rav Chaskel Levenstein, Zechron Levracha, tells us there was a Mr. Sassoon who lived in Shanghai. He was a Yid that donated a lot of money. In fact, I think he was responsible for the Mir Yeshiva's building in Shanghai, if I'm not mistaken. I saw this years ago, but he gave a mashal. There was this building that was erected that Mr. Sassoon got possession of, and it was on an empty plot of land, and it was a magnificent building. But the problem was he didn't realize that the foundation of the building, that was the plot of land that he built the building on, was a garbage heap. And it was like, who knows how many feet down until you finally strike earth. So every year the building would be sinking. I believe there was a certain mall in Muncie 10 years ago that had the same kind of reputation. You can have a magnificent building, said Rav Chatzkel. You could do mitzvahs and Torah and chesed, but if your foundations are faulty, if a person doesn't work on his midas, if we don't work on our character traits, a lot of times we're doing all things for the ulterior motives. We're not doing things for the right reasons. And then the whole thing can fail because we haven't addressed the real issues, why we're doing things. We want our mitzvahs to be pure, and we have to address our character in order to make sure that our mitzvahs are in a proper vessel. Today, we're going to explain the rebuke given to Reuven, who is the eldest, and it's quite strong. Here's the verse. It's chapter 49, Perak Memtes, Pasuk Gimel. Reuven, Bechoriata. Reuven, you're my eldest. Kochi, Bechoriata, Kochi Bereshis Oni. You're my strength, and you're the beginning of my vigor. In other words, he was his first child. Yeser se'es v'yeser oz. Literally, that means you have greater lifting and greater strength. But pachas kamayim al tosar. But you were volatile. You were not self-controlled. Impulsive, like water. And you're not going to gain any more. Ki alisa mishkavei avecha, because you went up on your father's couch. As chilalta yitzui Allah. The couch or the bed that you went on top of, you desecrated. That's pretty strong stuff. And this is 4 final parting words from his father. So the Rashi tells us about this yeser se'es, you had greater lifting power, and yeser oz, and more strength. Rashi explains it to mean yeser se'es, nesias kapayim, raising your hands to bench the people of Klal Yisrael, is the gift given to the Kohanim. You could have been the Kohen, Reuven, the yeser oz. It says in Shmuel Aleph, Yitain oz lamalko. There's a verse that says, you give strength to your king, Who is the strongest person? Who's the most power? That's the king of the Jewish people. You, Reuven, could have been the Melech of Klal Yisrael. You could have had your tribe, could have been, but you were supposed to, and you were also supposed to get. You were the Bechoriyata. A Bechor gets double portion, but because you were impulsive and hasty, and it says you. Rashi says something very strong. You were very fast to show your anger. Because of that, it's like water, which breaks all boundaries when it flows, when it rushes. You too were impulsive with your anger. That's what Rashi says. And he says, because of that, you're going to lose 3 things. You're going to lose kahuna. You're not going to be a Kohen. You're not going to be a king. And you're not going to have double portion like the Bechor. And we know that Yosef ended up being the Bechor. Yosef got the double portion. 2 of his children got portions, Ephraim and Manasseh. So he got the double portion as a Bechor, which he was of Rachel. And we find that the Kohanim were all, the Kohanim were from Shevet Levi. And also the Se'es, Yehuda was the one that was the Melech. Reuven, you're supposed to have it all, and you lost it because of your impulsivity, and you got angry. We'll talk about the anger in a few minutes. But we have 3 questions to ask on this week's Parsha. Number 1, why did Yaakov rebuke him at this moment of his life? In fact, this event, says Rav Nebenzahl Shlita, happened when Yaakov came from Haran. This is in Parshas Vayechi. Yaakov at that time was 99 years old. And now on his deathbed, Yaakov is 148 years old. There's about 48 years time that he waited to give rebuke to his eldest son of what he had done 48 years previous. Now, why? And if you're going to say that Yaakov did not know about it, in Parshas Vayechi, we're told by Yelech Reuven, and Reuven went and he mixed up his father's couch and all that. By Yishma Yisrael, Yaakov heard. So if Yaakov heard, he knew already. So why did he wait 48 years to rebuke him? What, he thinks Reuven cannot take his rebuke? Like it says, Ohev Tochachos, someone who loves rebuke. It's one of the 48 ways to acquire Torah. If you can listen to somebody tell you something you did wrong, if you're able to accept it, it's one of the 48 ways to, yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't start on time. I did have technical difficulties today. I do try to start on time. Please forgive me. Somebody just sent me a message. I'm really sorry about today. Any case, so that's our first question. Why did Yaakov rebuke him now? Like, why did he wait so long? And it says, he doesn't want to hear Musar. Rashi says an interesting interpretation. He says he was afraid if he would have rebuked him previously, he would have followed the path of Esav. Really? Reuven's such a holy man. He was one of the 12 tribes of Israel who lit up the stones of the Kohen's breastplate. They got prophecy from those stones. They were all worthy individuals, holy men. How could it be that he couldn't take rebuke? We have to wait 48 years. Number 2, what did Reuven really do wrong? And number 3, it says another thing about Reuven. We're told in Gracious Rabbah that Reuven was the first person that ever did tshuva. Nobody ever did tshuva before Reuven. Reuven was the first person to do tshuva. Now, it's an interesting thing because there are many people that did tshuva before Reuven. We know Adam Arishon did tshuva, Cain did tshuva. The first person that ever did tshuva was Reuven. How can we understand such a thing? So let's get some of these answers together and life-changing lessons, ladies. So here we are. First of all, Reuven was a very special son. We know he's the one that brought jasmine for his mother to conceive. In fact, it tells us Bimei Haksir Hachitim, in the time when the harvest of the wheat was happening, he found jasmine, telling us that Reuven never would take anything that wasn't rightly his. He was very careful when there was all this, things that were harvested and cut around. He took from something that was hefker. He took from something that was totally permissible to him. And he wasn't present at the sale of Yosef. He and Binyamin were the 2 tribes. He had nothing to do with the sale of Yosef. And they say, look at he was called Reuven. Leah predicted with her prophecy, look at the difference between my son and Esav, the firstborn. My son, Esav, in fact, was so jealous of Yaakov his whole life that, that he wanted to, and he gave in to all his desires. Reuven not only did not give in to his desires, what did Reuven do? We find He was the one that tried to save Yosef's life, and Yosef was his chief rival, if any. He was like a Bechor, and Yosef was like a Bechor. And Yosef was from the beloved wife who had the special coat of colors. And Reuven was constantly worried that they shouldn't kill Yosef, that they shouldn't sell Yosef. He just wasn't present at the time of Yosef being in the pit when they took him out and sold him to the caravan of Yishmaelim. Reuven was doing tshuva for this thing that we're going to be speaking about today. So different. And we also know we're told, I believe in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. I'm sorry, there was a big thing that happened in my family today. That's why I was not able to. It's still going on. Okay. Rambam writes in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah that for a person to merit being a prophet, he has to be conquering his Yetzer Hara, and his Yetzer Hara never conquers him. And Reuven was worthy of prophecy. And here we find he did not do anything really horrible, because if he would have done something horrible, he wouldn't have been part of the 12 Shvatim. So when we're told that he slept with Bilhah, there's three opinions in the Gemara Shabbos. One opinion is that he actually did it. Second thing, he committed it in his mind, like he had a thought about it. Or the third opinion is after Rachel passed away, he was upset for the honor of his mother. Yaakov immediately moved his bed into the tent of Bilhah, who was the concubine or the maidservant of Rachel, and he was protesting. He was upset. He moved the bed, according to that opinion, into the tent of his mother, Leah. Or he messed up the bed, different things like that. We're told in the Gemara, in Shabbos, Kol ha'omer Reuven chata ena ela toa. Whoever says that Reuven sins is making a mistake. He's not a simple adulterer. The same thing we can say about David HaMelech and many others. When it says that he slept with somebody, we can never imagine such a thing would happen. It's not on our level. What we're talking about, and same thing with David, and same thing it talks about Bnei Eli and Shmuel Aleph, that they slept with other women. That what they meant was they delayed women from bringing their korban, their sacrifice for the new women that give birth. So because of that, it was considered as if they slept with them, because he kept it by postponing meeting these women. They kept them away from their husbands. So all these things are taken on another level. The way to understand this is, the Das Sofrim tells us there's different ways to weigh things. If you're weighing carrots, C-A-R-R-O-T-S, I don't know who you're speaking of. Okay, I shouldn't be reading your notes. It's distracting me. In any case, there's different ways to weigh things. So when we say that Reuven sinned, he slept with his father's wife, it's for sure not on that level. If you're weighing carrots, for example, at the supermarket, or celery or something like that, you're weighing in kilograms or pounds or whatever you're weighing in. When you're weighing diamonds, it's micromilligrams. Every little micromilligram is who knows how much more money. You're weighing it much differently. Or if, let's say, it gives another example. If a mother would say, you should hear how my son speaks. Now, if he's 6 months old, he's babbling away, thank God. But if he's like 35 and he's an accomplished speaker, or 45, whatever, that's a whole different story. Same thing on Reuven's level. This was equated with the worst sin of all. But what he did was actually very, very different than what it looks like in the Chumash. And this is like all the sins of our forefathers. They barely committed a sin. On our level, they're righteous like anything. But it's mentioned forever for us to be constantly aware, acutely aware of what we could succumb to. And all the beginnings begin with character. So we're told like this. First of all, being the eldest, you are very influential. We know that the oldest child, the kids copy, even from childhood, they're copying their parents or they're copying the older children. That's how it goes. So that's very, very important. And he can't have those responsibilities any longer of being the Kohen, whoever, a Kohen has to be very level-headed when he performs the service. He has to have many balls going at the same time. And he can't do that if he's a person that's impulsive and impetuous. And we find also a melech, a king, has to be thought out, everything he does. And with an impulsive, impetuous nature, you can't have those things anymore. But what did he actually do? We're told either he moved the bed, or to say that he's actually slept with her could have meant for 1 second in protest. He could have lied down in the bed because according to some opinions, a concubine is not even a wife. Now, he didn't do anything with her. He just slept on the edge of the bed. That's the worst that I've heard. Or it could have been he slept there when she wasn't there, slept on her bed, all in protest. But what was wrong about that on his level? For a person like this who's supposed to be the eldest of the children, the one to set the example, he was protesting his mother's honor, that his father's not moving his bed to lay his tent. But the father moved the bed because the father saw he saw the Shekhinah above the tent of Bilhah. And when he saw the Shekhinah in that place, he knew that's where he's supposed to go. So the father was doing the directive in the right way, but Reuven didn't take time to maybe consult with your father, speak about it. But no, you rush into things like that and make a big protest. And, despite the fact that you want to save your brother's life and all the other wonderful things, you can't be the manhig. You can't be the leader of the Jewish people. You can't be the Bechor. You can't be the Kohen, and you can't be the king. You lost all of that, and in fact, we're told by the Zohar, Leah was really greater than Rachel was. He had a reasonable, complaint here, but there's a way to do it. And the Ksab HaKabbalah, by the way, mentions, says Rav Nebenzahl, if it would be something that he actually did a terrible deed with her, it would have said Vayavo, and he came to her. But it says Vayetze Reuven, he left. So it's nothing to do with any physical relations that he had with the wife of his father's, the concubine or whatever, the wife of his father, Bilhah. It had to do with his impulsivity. In fact, that's all he censures him for, that we were impulsive when you did such an act. Now, we find that, later he corrected this disregard for his father. By Mechiras Yosef, he was only, what was really wrong, the impulsivity, what was wrong about it was that he disregarded his father's honor. Maybe his father knows what he's doing, okay, you could have a different opinion. So before you go and take action, consult with other people, discuss it, hear their side of the story. And he when he found him in the pit, he cried, Yosef, because he fed Hayelad Einenu Bani Anani Ba. The son is not here, and where am I going to be? And Rashi says, how am I going to run away from my pain of my father? And he tried to save him from the pit. Lashivo El Aviv, we're mentioning, he wanted to bring him back to his father. He tried to constantly think, how can I perfect my honoring my father? So in short, what Reuven had tremendous levels. He was definitely a Navi, and you have to be a Gibor b'midosav, and you have to be on top of your midos all the time. Your Yetzer Hara cannot get a hold of you. He's a great person. But in this case, this one instance, he was too hasty and impulsive, and he waged a protest, and he was disregarding his father's honor. That's what Rav Nebenzahl said he did wrong. And because of the disregard for his father, he later even corrected. He was sitting with a sackcloth and ashes and trying to make good on this the rest of his life. In fact, when the brothers came to Mitzrayim and they stood before Yosef, they regretted not being sympathetic to his cries. That's what they said between themselves. But Reuven's thoughts, he says, "V'gam damo hinei nidrash." And here, they're talking about that his blood is also has been spilled, and now Hashem is paying us back for what we did to our brother Yosef. Reuven's thoughts were, I'm worried about the gam. I'm worried not only about my brother, but also my father's feelings. And they stood before the viceroy in Egypt, not knowing he's Yosef. And they were all saying, oh, we shouldn't have sold our brother. That's why we're in for all these problems right now. Reuven's thoughts were, I am worried that my father's honor. I'm worried I'm correcting the sin that I did of disregarding my father. And Yaakov is pointing out to Reuven that the source of it all is from him being too hasty, impulsive, and he's letting, if you look into Rashi, he says that caused him to be full of anger. Now, Did Reuven correct his sin? We see from Yaakov's rebuke that there was no mention made of kibbut avim. There's no mention made of the actual sin at all. But pachas kamayim, you're too hasty, you're too radical, and it's a lack of thought. And you need that for leadership. And he didn't ask your father, you didn't consult with your father, you took action, you had too much impatience. And we're learning from this how much patience a person has to have. If you have patience, you get everything. Without patience, you get nothing. The Jews were impatient. They wanted to make the egel. They wanted to make the golden calf. Or Shaul HaMelech, who was a descendant of Rachel, but he was impatient, about Amalek. And all these people lost these great things because of their impatience. So this is what Rav Nebenzahl tells us, and he corrected it, but he had still, at the time of Yaakov's passing, to correct the trait of being impulsive. And he did, apparently, because otherwise we wouldn't have the 12 tribes the way they are today. Rav Nebenzahl mentioned something else that's really, really phenomenal and important. How can we say, he says, how can we say that he would have gone to Esav if he would have rebuked him earlier? Maybe, he says, we can't look at it again literally that he wanted to actually copy Esav, after, oh, you rebuked me, I'm going to go to Esav. He maybe would have entertained the thought that Esav wouldn't have done this to me. I'm getting all this rebuke here, and Esav wouldn't have given to me. It would have been easier. So Yaakov waited 48 years to give him rebuke because he didn't even want him to have a thought like that of entertaining. He wanted him to be so pure. He didn't want him to even entertain the thought about going Esav's direction. Even a thought he was worried about. Or more likely, even in the beginning, he wouldn't go toward Esav, but ultimately it could lead him down that path, perhaps. We find that Lot, for example, looked a lot like Abraham. He had a big similarity. And when someone looks like somebody, says Rav Nebenzahl, it means that there's something similar in their character as well. So Lot had this trait of chesed and all kinds of wonderful things. But after he got rebuked for his servants not being careful with where they were shepherding their sheep, and the sheep were eating, grazing in pastures that didn't belong to them, all of a sudden, Lot can't handle it anymore, and he goes, makes himself scarce, and ends up in Sodom. So says Rav Nebenzahl, we have to understand something. We have to be really careful if we rebuke anybody. It's a big lesson. Person can leave everything out of embarrassment. Rav Meir Chadash Zatzal was the Mashgiach in Hebron, this big, huge book about him, biography of his life. And the main trait, I think, from the entire biography is that he would not rebuke a student. He felt in our generation, people can't handle it. So he still did. People still, they need rebuke. Rav Nassim Wachvogel says a person needs rebuke. Rebuke it helps a person become a total keli, a total vessel, so they can receive blessing. If a person has faults, if a person has faults, you're helping them by giving them rebuke. But if somebody won't take rebuke, we're not supposed to give it. We have to be so careful in our day. There's so many people that cannot handle any type of rebuke. We have to think 50 times before we give anyone any kind of rebuke. And here, the same thing with Reuven. There's a halacha that if a person tells a child, I'm gonna punish you later. I'm not gonna punish you now, but I'm gonna punish you later. What happens is the child can actually hurt themselves out of fear. It said if you want to punish a child, halacha says you should do it now or don't do it at all. Like, don't threaten somebody, you're going to hurt them later. There was a story given in the Gemara about a child who fell into a pit or threw himself into a pit because he was so terrified of what his father scared him with. We find that we're learning a halacha from Yaakov Avinu. How do we know it's a halacha? Because King Shmuel Hanavi, rather, not Shaul. Shmuel Hanavi, Yoshua, and David all waited to rebuke their family until the last day of their life. And the major rebuke they gave the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu only gave the Jewish people major rebuke after 40 years. Sometimes, there's got to be a time and a place to give rebuke, and it's got to be seldom, not too often. We find by a famous story by Reuven ben Nevat, must have heard this famous thing. We're told that Reuven ben Nevat was so special. It said all the other chachamim, all the other wise people in the time of Reuven ben Nevat were like grass compared to him. And his Torah, there was nothing wrong with his Torah. But what happened? Reuven succumbed, and out of his desire for respect, he decided to build his own temple and have like idolatry in the temple, because he was the king of Yisrael, 10 tribes, but he did not have the place in Yehuda and Binyamin. He wasn't Yehuda. So what happened was he got so jealous, he decided to build his own temple in his own place, and he succumbed to idolatry. So Chazal tell us in Gemara Sanhedrin, Tafso HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yeravam B'Vigdo, Hashem, so to speak, took him by his clothing and Amarlo, Chazor B'cha, and said, do tshuva, Yeravam, you're such a great person. You were chosen to be the head of 10 tribes. That's a big thing. And even though he was a big sinner, they gave him another chance. And then he said, Bata uben Yishai nitayel b'gan Eden, and you and David and I will walk together, whatever that means, in Gan Eden. What does Yeravam answer? He says, Mi barosh, who's going to be the head? Who's going to be the head of this walk? And Hashem said, Ben Yishai barosh, because the tribe of Yehuda has to go first. They're the king. And he said, if that's the case, I'm not interested. That's what he chose. And he lost his portion of doing tshuva, lost olam haba because of his desire for respect. Unbelievable. But we have to understand that the whole thing of Yeravam, that he was so great, but he wanted to be all or nothing. You know, we have to keep this in mind when we're giving rebuke. If somebody is going to lose it all when you rebuke them, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And there's a famous story, says Rav Nebenzahl, about the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim one time was on a train, and he was with somebody, and this person was lauding the Chavetz Chaim and saying how great he was. And of course, he couldn't stand all the praise. So the Chavetz Chaim answered him. He says, you think he's so great? He's not so great. No, he was talking about himself. And what happened was that what's it called? That this man he starts screaming at the Chavetz Chaim. How do you talk about a great Rav like that? How do you talk about Chavetz Chaim like that? And at the end of the train ride, this man found out that he was indeed sitting with the Chavetz Chaim himself. He begged his forgiveness, and the Chavetz Chaim says, no, in fact, I have to thank you. You taught me an important lesson, that a person shouldn't talk lashon hara even about himself. So Nebenzahl takes this parallel, and he says from this too, he says, we shouldn't give ourselves too much musar. We shouldn't rebuke ourselves too much. We should understand if someone is put down too much, they can't get up anymore, and they feel like giving up totally. And although he says that if you don't have any rebuke, then you're like an animal. Person should sometimes sit down and take stock of his deeds. Mostly the high holidays time, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, you should analyze what you're doing, and if you're doing it right or wrong, or more than that, of course, if you can. But if you see it's getting you down all the time, when you analyze, you see you have so many shortcomings, then you see this is what happened with Reuven, that why Yaakov waited 48 years to rebuke him, because he says it takes away from your everyday service. When you're constantly putting yourself down, and you're constantly feeling down, you may not live up to it. But on the other hand, oev tachachos, if you like rebuke, you are a person that's going to accept the Torah. A person should be willing to take rebuke. So ladies, what we've said so far is, we've said on one hand, what Reuven did good was that Reuven was out for his brother's honor, no self. He was totally selfless, helping his brother Yosef, even though he was his prime rival. And yet his impulsivity for the sake, the honor of his mother, but it constituted a slight lack of honoring his father, and him taking a stance, making a whole protest and everything. He should have had more contemplation and thought before he did something, and that was his downfall. And here he postponed giving him rebuke, says Rav Nebenzahl, because this is the way of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu waited 40 years. We said David HaMelech didn't rebuke till his final days. And we find the same thing by Shmuel Hanavi, that to teach us that there are many times we have to watch ourselves and hold back the rebuke. You know, it's very common what people do when they get upset at each other, that they heap on the other person, like, you know, you're upset at somebody, so then you heap all the things you're upset about them for at once. You know, that's really too much. Nobody can handle it. You know, there is a time to say something, but we have to make sure we really think it over. If necessary, we can consult with a Rav if we feel like, you know, should we say something? Should we not say something? Sometimes, you know, it's worth it to, or talk it over with a friend or with someone. You know, of course, our children, when they're growing up, that's what we're here for, you know, but still, it's got to be in proper measure. If you too much label somebody something, you're always putting them down. What we're doing is we're hurting ourselves. We're hurting ourselves because they're not going to listen, and ultimately they may be too hurt to improve, and they may go all the way down. So that's what they meant. He would go in the way of Esav. There's times we have to limit and watch what we are going to rebuke people with. However, we say from Rav Nosson Bachvogel, the reason this was the bracha for the tribes, the bracha is to know yourself, to know what you have to work on, and from there, you're going to be, from that, you can have your shemaim and everything from just working on your character. That's really what gets you points. That's really what gets you somewhere. We also mentioned, just to review again, that he corrected this problem. He was not rebuked at all for lacking respect for his father, because he was the first one to worry when he was not present at the sale of Yosef. He was the one to worry, where is this child? What's my father going to think that the child is not here anymore? And when they stood in Mitzrayim and they're all bemoaning the fact, maybe because of the sale, they're in trouble now with the viceroy, Reuven pipes up with, Gam damo hineni drash. I'm not just worried about his thing, but what about our father's tsar? What about our father's pain that he's not able to be here to witness this? And he sat in sackcloth and ashes, and all he had to work on now was his pachas kamayim, was the fact that he had this impulsivity. We're told that, I didn't write down who the source of this is, that I don't remember. I looked at so many Sfarim, believe me, that I don't remember who says this. Perhaps it was Rav Chaim Mintz. I don't remember. There's a difference between impulsivity and what's called, in Midos terms, zrizus. Zrizus means zealousness. It says a person should try to, whenever you do things with alacrity, when you do things with, you try to hurry to get it done, then it's a tremendous trait. It shows your love for the mitzvah and your love for Hashem. And you're supposed to try to do things quickly. It says one reason to do things quickly, it says tzaddikim do everything quickly. Why? Because when we do something quickly, it shows we don't want to lose the opportunity. You say tomorrow, mañana, you're going to say you're going to do it later. What happens is tomorrow may not ever come, and many other things stand in our way as obstacles. So we have to try to do whatever we can now. There's a big thing. But if you look at the Mesilas Yesharim, the guide, the path of the just, he tells us Zahirus may be early days reasons. You can't have proper alacrity until you're first careful and thought out. First, think out what you're going to do, and then go and conquer it. And hopefully we don't think about it too much during Shemona Esrei. But if a person has a lack of confusion, he performs better, and he can really perform with alacrity. The Kohanim are zrizim, but pachas kamayim, but bahala, confusion, lack of patience, that's not zrizus. That's not zrizus. Zrizus is when you're going to try to, you have enthusiasm for something and you're going to really try it, but having a lack of patience is something else. That's not enthusiasm. And this can't be passed on to the children. That's why Yaakov decided to rebuke the children on his deathbed. There's a story I've told you before, but it's good to mention it here. It fits right in. Rabbi Friedler, Zichrono Livracha, was the Rosh Shiva of Ner Yisrael in Toronto. He once was trying to help Rav Dessler Zatzal collect tzedakah. They went there in Washington Heights. They were going to some wealthy people in Manhattan, so they took the train. And Rabbi Friedler heard the train coming. He was a young man at the time. He started running down the stairs, and Rav Dessler says, "We don't run. even to do a mitzvah, we don't run. It's not the way of people. Jews, if we run, I mean, of course, if somebody, this question of life and death, then you're running to do a mitzvah. But let's say that here he was going to collect, okay, it's money for yeshiva, but still, sometimes if we run too much in haste, we'll forget what we're in the world for. We run away from, to save a life, we run, that's for sure. But anything else, we don't run to. A Jew could not make his business to run, I mean, in other words, run like crazy, like just let yourself go and run. We should realize that time it's bashir, what's going to happen. We have to do what we have to do, and we shouldn't push ourselves to run like that. The idea of thought before anything else, this was the whole idea of the Kelm Yeshiva that was established in a city called Kelm, Lithuania, where Simcha Zisel was in the ways of the Musar movement. They were all trained to it says, for example, in Chumash, Vayisa Avram Esenav, Avram lifted his eyes. Why does we have to be told that in the Chumash? Avram lifted his eyes. So, I mean, every time somebody lifts their eyes, we have to mention it. What was the point? No, the point was Avram thought, I have to lift my eyes. There's a big difference. He didn't just do something knee-jerk. He thought over things before he did it. That's quite a major accomplishment to think before you look at something. That's amazing. There was a story about Kelm that many stories that they had all this forethought and everything they did. There was once a parade. The Tsar was coming to town. He came to Kelm, and it was in the middle of Kabbalah Shabbos. They were singing Lecha Dodi, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the town, in those days, the whole city was decorated, and they had, banners everywhere, and you hear all these instruments playing of the, some kind of band was playing as he made his way along a certain route. And he passed the yeshiva at a certain point when they were in the middle of Kabbalah Shabbos. We were told not one person in the yeshiva turned his head, even out of curiosity, to look. These ended up to all be very great men that came out of the Kelm Yeshiva. They only had 35 people at any given time, and they all became great Torah scholars. Because we're very far from this, but this is an idea of thinking before we do something. And this is supposed to be a Jewish trait. And if we want to have success in our life, if we think more often, and then we'll do the right thing more often. That's what happens when we go wrong. Oh, I think it was Revolba that said this, it was Revolba who says that this is, that it is rezus, that having alacrity is different than being impatient. He said that Revolba says something very interesting. He says it's very important for a person to know their primary good trait and their primary bad trait. He says you can change your whole life by knowing those two factors. If you know your primary good trait, for example, let's say a person, he gives an example, is a Baal Chesed. He's very kind. So let's say he's being lazy. His kindness can motivate him. Look, you're missing out on helping another person if you don't get out of bed. I'm just giving that as one example. There's many such examples, but a lot of minor other character traits can be pulled up by the fact that he's got this one fantastic trait that he possesses. And on the same time, a person has to know what's their worst trait. And if a person has a worst trait, that can pull him all down. That's why it's so important to know ourselves, to know what motivates us, what doesn't motivate us. Now, we can't get crazy with this in our generation. We're not on the level of the former generations where they could really hyper-analyze. Like, look, Reuven's taken to task for a one-time protest. That's pretty good. All of us should have that on our tombstones, But it teaches us that you have to know your main positive and negative traits, and that's what Yaakov, in fact, told him. And from this, we can... that it's very important for a person to know himself, and then from that, it can push him on further. And he knows that I have to use this trait to motivate me, the good trait, and I have to be aware of this trait affecting me, that this what's influencing me right now. Now, there's a story of Simcha Bunim in Peshischa, one of the great Hasidic leaders. One time in the middle of the night, he felt like getting up and smelling snuff. He had a big desire to smell snuff. What could be so bad? He's not gaining any weight, And he told himself, maybe it's taiva, it's desire. Then he says, maybe I'm staying in bed because I'm being lazy. So he decided to get out of bed, walk all the way to the snuff, and go back to bed. Thereby, he wouldn't be guilty of desire, and he wouldn't be guilty of laziness. So these are just things for us to think about in our pursuit of self-perfection. We want to come to next Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and say that we got a few inches further than we were last year. And this is the key. The key is midos, and that's what Yaakov was centering his sons at the end of his days. Rav Nosson Bachvogel says that this pachas kamayim, this impulsivity that it says it was like water flowing the way you acted. Rashi mentions it connects with anger. And he says anger, says Rav Nosson Bachvogel, comes from a lack of yishuv hadas. A person isn't settled in himself. He's not happy, a basically happy person. He's not settled within himself. And what does that mean? Like, for example, I remember reading, I forgot her name, Miriam something, who was years ago, one of these ladies that talked about parenting, Miriam Levy. She wrote a book about parenting, and she said that when a person gets angry, I thought it was very instructive. Person gets angry, they're usually their last line, they tell themselves, but I want it this way. I want it this way. And this is why and now I can get angry because it's not going my way. And that's why they connect very often. Anger is connected with gaiva, with arrogance, because it's all about me. I'm angry, something didn't go my way, or this didn't happen the way I want it. And that's the lack of yishuv hadas. Yishuv hadas means I'm not happy right now with the way things are going. It's a lack of bowing your head and saying, look, God threw this at us. We have to accept it and deal with it. Or a person saying, this I will not tolerate. I have a story, again, I think I told this years ago, so I can say it again. But once, if you all remember, maybe 8-9 years ago in Toronto, there was a blackout in August. We all remember it. Why? Because the blackout happened, I believe it started on a Thursday night, and it was most of Friday. But eventually the power did come back on, but there was a whole problem. How are you going to get challah? Because if you wanted to bake your own challah, the mixer would nothing plugged in, nothing worked. It was no power. It was all, we were using candles. I remember the whole thing. And it was a Thursday night, Friday, and Friday, middle of Friday, finally the power went on. So my daughter went for me to one of the bakeries in town, which was it had a generator, and it was this long line because of the situation. So my daughter said she heard somebody that was wealthy. She said something. Till this day, I don't know who it was. She never told me names, God forbid. She said it was a wealthy person. The wealthy person was saying, this is not for my ego. And when my daughter told me this story, I told her this was for her ego. This is to show her we have to have patience. Things don't go our way all the time. We have to we can't say this I won't tolerate. What do you mean? If God gave it to us, we have to tolerate it. It's supposed to be. This is what's supposed to be, and this is from Hashem, and we have to be able to live through it. Nosson Bachvogel says the eldest, when he's the oldest, he's the beginning. He's the Rashis. Rashis usually is like Bikurim and Bechor. They're the oldest. The whole thing starts from beginnings. Ramban tells us in Igeras Ramban, the letter he writes to his children, the Ramban says, you should always be careful to speak softly to other people. And this way you'll save yourself from anger. Because he says anger is a very bad midah, and it brings everything else on. If you're careful with anger, you'll become humble. And if you're careful with humility, you'll come Yireh Shamayim. So he said, it's very interesting. In the Rashis, and the first child born to his father, he was the Rashis, but he ruined himself with one of the worst, the primal type of sin, which is anger. Anger can lead to all bad things. And everything begins of beginnings. Everything depends on the beginnings, and everything depends on anger, and everything depends on him. The Rambam, who says that you should be balanced with all your traits, when it comes to anger and arrogance, he says, no, you can't be balanced with it. You have to be mostly not getting angry. But the Maharal Miprag tells us in Pirkei Avos that it's impossible for a person never to be angry. That's impossible. Never to be angry is impossible. But that a person should minimize like they say with persons in labor, that, you want your contractions to be longer and stronger and closer together. We want our anger incidences to be shorter and farther apart and less intense. Whoever's angry doesn't have wisdom, says Rav Nosson Bachvogel. And without wisdom, he said, you don't have anything in Gashmias, you have nothing materially, and you have nothing physically in your life. So that's why, whether it's anger, whether it's just confusion, but Rav Nosson says it comes from a lack of Yishuv Hadas, from being settled with yourself. All these things we have to be aware of because they get us into tremendous problems. Rav Aryeh Leibach, Zichrono Livracha, the Rashu of Detroit, still tells us in his Sefer Kol Aryeh, Reuven's tshuva was exemplary. Nobody ever did tshuva like Reuven. How do we know that? How do we understand that Gemara, that nobody ever did tshuva before Reuven? The unusual aspect of his tshuva, which is very interesting, is that previously people would regret a misdeed and repent. No, I did this thing wrong. I'm so upset at myself. Here, what was Reuven doing when he was doing tshuva? He's wearing sackcloth and ashes, and he's trying to save Yosef's life. This is what made him unusual and exemplary. He says, usually, when a person engages in a big mitzvah, whatever that is, pidyon shvuyim, you're saving the people in jail, or you're going to march up making shalom bayis for 2 people, or you're making a almana happy, or whatever, all those things that people think are great, great deeds of chesed. Usually, at that moment, a person is not so humble and remorseful for his deeds. He's usually he doesn't even see that I ever did anything wrong. I'm engaged in a big mitzvah right now. I can't. Reuven could hold those 2 emotions simultaneously. In other words, be engaged in a big action, a big, great action, whatever it may be, a good Shemona Esrei, whatever it is, your great actions you're doing, and at the same time, not hold himself high. Still remember, I have a lot to correct. I have a lot to do. And because a lot of times you do mitzvah, you become persuaded that, you neglect revisiting your shortcomings. Reuven didn't get blinded by the mitzvah that he was engaged in. Even when he returned to the pit, he was still with the sackcloth and ashes. So when we do a good deed, it can't blind us of all the things we still have yet to do. There's something called vidui maser. Vidui maser is something that someone performs when a person brings from his crops. You're supposed to go to the Beis Hamikdash with 10th of your crops, of certain crops, and you're supposed to say, Arami Oved Avi. You're supposed to say, my father was once, serving Lavan, and he went through all these trials and tribulations. We say that at a great moment of happiness. The farmer has brought things from his crops. He feels so good. He's harvested everything. And at the same time, even though he's harvested everything, he is saying vidui. He's confessing. And it says, Bi'arti HaKodesh bin Habayis. I did all the halachas I'm supposed to do. He's supposed to say these words when he's doing the mitzvah of Maser. So you're still you're investigating yourself, you're introspecting at the moment of a great mitzvah to teach us that we are supposed to be always aware of our shortcomings, not let it get us down. If that's too much, then you're going too far, but this is what Reuven did. Rav Dessler tells us that Mashiach can only come in 2 instances, in a dor shekulo chayav and a dor shekulo zakai. You can come in a generation where everybody is guilty, meaning sinners, or it can come in a generation where everybody's innocent. Now, what about the middle people? Why can't Mashiach come when people are just in the middle like we are? Because one thing, says Rav Dessler, that's equivalent with a dor shekulo chayav, with a generation that's all exemplar, that's all guilty, with a generation that's all exemplary. What they have in common, the common denominator. You think, what could be the common denominator of tzaddikim and rishayim? But the common denominator is they all feel they have more work to do. If Mashiach would come and somebody is a wicked person, he'd say, I didn't bring Mashiach. I did the heck of whatever I wanted, so I don't think it was me. I mean, most people are not fooling themselves to that extent. And a tzaddik is saying, I don't think it's because of me. I have so much more to go. But an average person could perhaps, at Rav Dessler, fool himself and say, I did last week go to shul, I gave to the soldiers. I did something for the war effort. A person can fool himself and think that he's done something when we have so much more to do. So let's look at this balanced aspect of tshuva that we learned from Reuven. On one hand, not to give rebuke or not to rebuke ourselves too much in our lifetime, to try to do it, make sure it's balanced, that we're erring on the side of happiness, but on the same time to be aware of our shortcomings and how a strong trait, we have to know what our strong good trait is, says Reuven, and the strong weak trait is, so we can, use that to overcome things in our life. And we learned from Reuven his greatness, that was just impetuosity. It was nothing more than that. He didn't do anything really seriously wrong. But we learned from him how we have to work on our character, and that was the parting blessing that Yaakov gave his children, and in particular today's topic, Reuven. I thank you for listening. I thank Rivka Shabsa for her amazing work that she does for us every week, and also Debbie Menzelewski for all the great thing that she does for us every week. And I thank you all for listening. So now we're going to, everyone can unmute themselves. And if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear them.